Welcome to Beyond the Flight Deck podcast with United Airlines pilot and investment advisor, Alan Bewley, who will take you behind the scenes with airline pilot entrepreneurs, academics, and other professionals. And now, your host, Alan Bewley.
Adversity is a term often used by the media, politicians, and even college football coaches. Oftentimes, people's actions create adversity, where others are born with it. My next guest, Airick Gaffney, the United 737 first officer, was born with it. Since birth, he's been challenged physically and socially in day-to-day life. Through perseverance and support from his loved ones, not to mention a few unexpected sources, Airick attained his dream of becoming a pilot for a major airline. Without further ado, here is Airick's story. Welcome Beyond the Flight Deck. All right, welcome to episode 5 of Beyond the Flight Deck. Today I've got United pilot, 737 first officer, Houston-based Airick Gaffney. Airick, welcome Beyond the Flight Deck.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Hey, let's talk a little bit about Airick. Let's talk a little bit about where you got to where you are today, and we'll talk shortly about why you're my guest today. Because in most cases, you're just another United 737 first officer, with one exception. Let's talk a few minutes about, give us the quick spiel on where you grew up, what it's like, what it was like growing up in the Gaffney family. Were your parents in aviation? If not, what did they do? And what got you into aviation?
I'm from Oklahoma, born and raised in the Tulsa area. I actually still live here. I live in Broken Arrow, a suburb of Tulsa. And growing up, my dad, he's a mechanic for American Airlines. Tulsa is a large maintenance base for American. They have a lot of employees out here, always have. And he's been working there for over 30 years, coming up on 35 years. So he's a mechanic, and that's what kind of sparked my interest into the field of aviation. We did a lot of traveling growing up, a lot of non-rev traveling, and always around airplanes and always talking airplanes. But that's kind of what got me interested in it. But growing up, other than that, big baseball player, rock climber. I was in scouts. Actually, I'm Eagle Scout, and my parents just kept me involved in absolutely anything and everything I wanted to do. Sure. Very involved through the school, and obviously baseball was kind of my big thing, but then scouts was the next biggest thing I did. Was I did a lot of rock climbing and a lot of camping and outdoors related stuff through the scout troop, which was fun.
Any siblings? And if so, did they fly as well? Did they fly as well?
Yeah, 2 siblings. I've got a younger sister and an older sister. Nothing in aviation. My younger sister is a teacher right now. She teaches 3rd grade. And my older sister, she actually, she lives out in Florida, but no aviation related, no aviation with my siblings.
Yeah. Now I've got an older brother who can't spell airplane, not literally, but has no interest. When you were younger, was your aviation, did any airplanes in the family or friends? Did your dad do any flying, private pilot or anything like that? Or was it just riding on the airlines when you were young?
When I was young, it was just mostly riding on the airlines. As I got to be a little more involved, we do have a distant cousin who lives out in out in the Napa area of California. Mm-hmm. He had his own Cherokee, Piper Cherokee. I got to be around it a little bit. I got to fly it out of Angwin Field in California, fly it over the bay. But that was really kind of as I got closer to being involved in flight training. But growing up, no, mostly there was no private aviation. It was all airline stuff. So my sights were kind of always set on the airlines, specifically American, because, that was kind of the family I grew up in. But just a lot of airlines.
My dad being a 33-year United guy, I was the same way.
Yeah.
Then I realized I'm from Alabama and we don't have a domicile anywhere near Alabama. So, maybe got hired by the wrong airline from that perspective, but I think from every other perspective, I think you and I did just fine. The aviation bug hits you growing up, and at some point it's time to start learning how to fly. Where did you do that? Was it just at a local FBO, or did you end up at a flight school somewhere?
Kind of both. I started my freshman year in college at the University of Oklahoma in Norman. Mm-hmm. And I went into college not knowing exactly. I wasn't sure yet if I wanted to do aviation. I kind of was. I had a couple doubts. Number one, physically, if I was going to be able to do it, but also I didn't know that I wanted to take on the role of an airline pilot, being gone all the time. I knew one day I wanted to be a family man and be married with kids like I am today. I didn't know if that lifestyle was for me. So anyhow, I started college at OU, and I actually started out as pre-med, and I worked in a hospital when I was in high school, and I just loved the aviation, or excuse me, the medical field. And
Yeah.
I kind of thought I'd really love to be a doctor one day, and started going down that path, and very quickly realized that, hey, this isn't for me. The OU has a flight school. The University of Oklahoma has their own flight school, and they have these Piper Cherokees. They're warriors, and they would fly constantly overhead to flight school. And I'd be walking to class my freshman year, and I'd see these little airplanes flying overhead, and I knew that's what I wanted to do. So I started pursuing that career, that avenue, and kind of realizing that, hey, medical is not for me. I want to go into aviation. How can I make that happen? So I went out to the flight school, talked to the chief pilot, the chief flight instructor at the time, and he his name was Dave, and he kind of walked me through some of the things that I'd have to do with things I may have to do differently with how I was born. And the that got me interested. So we were coming up on the end of my freshman year, so we're coming into the summer, so we're coming up on summer break. So I took it upon myself. I went home for the summer, and I did my private pilot part 61 in Tulsa at the Riverside Airport. And so I did my private part 61. The rest of my training was done part 141 through the University of Oklahoma.
Cool. So you got a local instructor and ground school, did all that there. You knocked it out that summer pretty quick.
I wish I could say that, but with all the different loopholes that I had to jump through, all the medical additional things I had to go through, it took me an extra several months. In fact, my fall semester of my sophomore year was just really piecing together all the loose ends of the different courses that I needed to take, like the core courses that I would need to graduate. But because flying was really put on hold for me, because I was going through all the medical process with the FAA, the local FSDO, to receive my private pilot certificate.
And so you got that done. And then what year in college did you roll into the 141 program and start flying there at OU?
So it was my sophomore year. I think I was done with my private by November of my sophomore year. So I think I really started right away. They kind of, you don't really necessarily have to start right away in these flight courses, because some of these people would finish early and you can roll you in. I don't speak on behalf of what they do, but it may be different now, but I started right away. And I also started flying over the winter break. They could make exceptions where you can wrap up your flying or start your flying early over the winter break. But it was my sophomore year of college, about halfway through, when I started flying full time for the 141. And that was, pursuing the next ratings, instrument, commercial, all that.
At some point throughout college, you finish all your ratings through CFI. You get all that through at OU?
I did. Yes.
Okay. And then you end up teaching there, or did you?
Yeah. Okay. I taught ground school, and I also was a flight instructor and a check airman, stage check airman.
So what was your first non-flight instructing flying job out of OU?
We had a kind of a flow through deal and a preferential hiring with Pinnacle Airlines. At the time they were Pinnacle, now they're Endeavor Airlines, Delta Connection. That was out of Memphis. So my first job was flying the CRJ for Pinnacle Airlines, Endeavor Airlines today, out of Memphis.
And was that job the only one you had before you came to United, or did you end up somewhere else? Do you have more than 2 uniforms hanging up in your closet?
I have a lot of uniforms. Yeah. I never timed any place at the right time. Always, I came in at bankruptcies or mergers, always kind of sliding on the seniority lists. So no, if you want me to go through them, I will. But I went from Pinnacle Airlines to flying 135. I flew for two different 135 operators, Caravans in Hawaii. Actually was based in Maui. I flew inter-island, and then I flew for Seaport Airlines out of Memphis on the Caravan and the Pilatus PC-12.
Yeah.
And then I went back to 121. I went to ASA Express Jet out of Atlanta. I did Dulles, Atlanta, and DFW. So I flew United Express, Delta Connection, and American Eagle for one airline. And then I actually went to Compass Airlines because, again, just never the right place at the right time.
Right.
I'm watching my friends at Compass upgrading while I'm back on reserve as an FO. ASA Express Jet, just things were slipping downhill there, unfortunately. Great place to work, but I went to Compass, and I wasn't at Compass, but 6 months or so, maybe a little bit longer. I guess a little bit longer than that before I got an interview and got hired at United. So I was never in the right place at the right time, but it all led to where, all led me here, which is good.
Yeah. And so you're a 2016-ish hire at United? Okay.
Yep. And just Monday, I hit 5 years. Yep.
Yeah. Good. Cool. So we know how you got here as far as the, big picture. So let's talk about why we're having this conversation. I think it's going to be really interesting for a lot of people to learn what it's like to be born a little bit differently than most, and the real adversity and challenges that you face. You were born a little bit differently than most people. Tell us what that was like, and tell us what that was.
Yeah, I was born without my right hand. Put them both up here. But this was a at birth defect called a limb difference. Not extremely common, but more common than you might realize. But there's a lot of different theories about how it could have happened. A lot of different ideas like umbilical cord cutting off circulation, or amniotic band syndrome, or even a pinched nerve in my neck, which restricted blood flow to my arm, which restricted the growth of my hand. But it's how I was born. So I came into the world like this, and never known any different. For me, I always joke that if I were to gain the right hand, I wouldn't know how to fly an airplane. because I make that joke because there's a lot of people who lose limbs today, and they face a kind of a different challenge that I may have faced throughout my career, because they're being thrust into it with something that's unknown. But for me, it was known from the beginning. Like I said, it's born without it. So never known any different.
It'd be kind of like going blind as an adult, or going deaf as an adult, having an accident, losing a limb or partial limb. Yeah, sure. Well, let's go back in time a little bit. You and I have said in our previous conversation, kids are mean. Sometimes they don't mean to be. Sometimes they're curious and things just come out wrong. At what point growing up did you know you were different? Did you start recognizing that you had a little difference than your other friends? And was it their reactions to you, or you just noticing yourself being different, or neither? I mean, was it a daily occurrence, a daily reminder when you were young? Kind of what was that experience like, growing up?
It's hard to think about that thing, because kids are mean, but it's kids are brutally honest is the way I like to really put it. I don't know that they're necessarily mean. The brutally honest is really they point it out to you, and they stare a lot, and they make they might make mean jokes, but sometimes it doesn't come off as a mean joke. Some kids do for sure, but there's certain kids that if we're playing a game of basketball, or a game of something on the playground or something, I might not have been picked because they didn't think I could keep up with them. But it all came down to proving them wrong and doing my best to do so. And kids would point and joke and laugh, but by just keeping plugged in and keeping right there with them and showing, hey, I'm just like you. I'm not any different. Hey, I'm not going away. Don't make fun of me. But I could let it get to me and shy away. And then the people who wanted to joke around and make mean jokes, that they're winning at that point. But I didn't let them win. I stood right there in there, and I make jokes with them. Hey, it's a shark attack. That's how I lost my hand. I still play along today. That's what I do. And but it kind of comes in waves. You get to a bigger school, you get more kids come in, and you got to kind of make got to get to know everybody, all the new kids. And People talk behind your back all the time, but again, all you got to do is stand in there and, show them, hey, I'm
Stand your
not
ground.
going away. I'm just like you.
Yeah.
I may not have two hands, but we're all different somehow. That's
Yeah.
kind of we're all different somehow. I look
Yeah.
a whole lot different than you, and that's okay.
Did you have one or two friends in particular that were always in your corner, whether it was your sisters or whether it was just a buddy of yours that you grew up with that was there for you, kind of stood by your side when maybe some of these things happen?
Oh, of course. My first off, my family always there for me. Mom and dad, never treated me any differently. Loved on me tremendously. My sisters, of course, too. They were always standing up for me. Always great. But absolutely, I had good friends growing up. Very good friends. In the neighborhood, just at school, you name it. We played sports together because I was in baseball my entire time growing up through school,
Yeah.
and all my teammates, everyone always had my back, and everyone always super friendly, and just I could hear them, or maybe if I didn't hear them, they would tell me like, hey, so and so was saying this, but I told them this, you should see him play baseball or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I always
Sure.
appreciated that. It was always nice to know that people are on your side.
When you batted, you obviously held the bat in your left hand. Did you stand as a right-handed batting stance or left-handed batting stance? So did
I
you
did
swing away
left-handed.
from your ball? Okay.
Yeah, some people, it's kind of, I guess some people would kind of have to choose which side they are. There's obviously I could go either way because your leading arm, excuse me, like in golf or baseball is your power arm.
Mm-hmm.
So if I batted right-handed, I probably would have had a little bit more power.
Mm-hmm.
But I always felt like I had more control by going across my body.
Okay.
So I swung the baseball bat left-handed.
Kind of like a forehand in tennis.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
I also did the same playing golf.
Okay.
I played golf swinging with one arm. Nowadays, I actually have a prosthetic for golf, but that's another story. But I still swing left-handed. Yeah.
And then what position did you play on defense in golf in baseball?
I used to pitch, but eventually I ended up going out to center field. I was fast.
Okay.
I could run fast, cover a lot of ground. That's kind of funny to ask. I'd get a lot of people who would steal on me a lot, steal third to go home, fly ball to me. They didn't think I could get the ball out of the glove quick enough. Yeah. But, after I threw out a few guys and they realized, hey, this guy can get the ball out just as fast as anyone else. Yeah. It was fun. It was really fun for me. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a catch and then basically get rid of the glove and grab the ball out of it, or did you tuck it under your arm and get it out?
When I was younger, when I was a kid playing, I would tuck the glove against my body, pull it off, grab the ball and throw.
Okay.
But as I got older and more competitive, kids got faster. I had to learn a new way to do it. So I actually would, after I caught the ball, I'd kind of flip the wrist with the ball up in the air, just a couple inches. And then I would take the glove off with my arm, grab the ball out of the air in one motion and throw.
Wow.
It's kind of it's something to see. A lot of people, it's kind of fun. In fact, I'm going to plan to put a video up on that on my Facebook page soon. So I have to look for that.
Yeah. Okay. That'd be cool to watch. I'd like to see that. So,
yeah.
Well, the reason I asked about that is because, we all know how most of us play baseball, and most of us weren't that good at it, probably not near as good as you. I certainly wasn't. I still remember like my one triple I ever hit, and I was in like sixth grade, fifth grade, right? That's it. All right, let's talk about flying airplanes with one hand. And before we talk about the mechanics of it, let's go back to you show up to the flight school there at home. You went and talked to the chief pilot or chief instructor at OU. I guess he was the one that kind of walked you through what you would have to do from a demonstrated ability standpoint, whether or not this could be a thing for you. Was it? Yeah. It was him at OU. Okay. So what did he tell you, and what was the process from a medical standpoint that you had to do?
Well, I will say, there's a lot of unknowns because he hadn't really gone through that. He hadn't seen anybody with my specific, in my, someone like me missing a hand or missing a limb. But he was vaguely aware of the process. He gave me the terms of what I would need to do as far as dealing with the FAA would be. But he really put me in both seats of the airplane and said, hey, can you turn this knob? Can you push this forward? And, can you manipulate this, manipulate that? And for me, who had zero experience with an airplane, it was extremely overwhelming because I'm thinking to myself, no, I can't do all that. I really can't, because it's like, I don't even know what this does and what this does and what that, I didn't know, because I couldn't find my rhythm. But really, he's really opening my eyes to it right away. But it wasn't, I didn't say no, I couldn't do it. Like, I was nervous. He really, because if he had told me straight up, no, I don't think you can do this, I would have walked away from there. Probably, I'd probably be a doctor today.
You'd be a lot wealthier anyway, right?
I probably would be, yeah. But he really put that confidence in me that he thinks I could do it, but he made me realize that it's not going to be easy, and it really wasn't. So then I went back to my private flight school here in Tulsa, Part 61. I worked with a flight instructor named Stan, and again, he didn't know where to go with that either. So we started multiple phone calls to the FAA, and even when I went in for my third class medical to get on the back of the third class medical was the student pilot certificate. Even the doctor who gave me my medical, who'd been doing this forever, he didn't even know exactly what to do.
Sure.
So I got my very first limitation right away. I've had 6 that I had to remove, but the first one was must fly with the FAA. With the FSDO prior to my first solo flight. So that gave me the reins to go out and begin my flight training, but I couldn't continue beyond the solo without having the FSDO observe me first. So, and that comes pretty quick in flight training, at least for most guys, but that was my first restriction. And like I said, I received 6 of them, which we can talk about if you want, but
Well, let's just talk about the first one, because that was probably one of the biggest hurdles, because you were least experienced and it was new. I'm sure more advanced stuff got harder, but did your initial instructor, what were you flying? Your initial, were you Piper, Cessna? Do you
Cessna
remember?
150.
Okay. Did you and your instructor, did you and Stan kind of figure it out, or did he just say, this is what you need to do, and you figured it out? How did those first couple of lessons go down?
It's a good question, because we actually, looking back, I wouldn't have done it this way, but if you're familiar with the Cessna, it's got the throttle on the Cessna is a push-pull compared to a lever like in a Piper or any modern jet for that matter. But the push-pull created a little bit of an obstacle for me with my right arm from the left seat. So my instructor thought, hey, you can fly from both seats. So why don't you just sit in the right seat? It'd be easier for you with this particular throttle to push and pull with your left hand. And that logic made sense to me at the time. So I said, oh, okay, yeah, no problem. I'll just sit in the right seat and push pull with the throttle, because everything is the same on both sides of those airplane. Now you're kind of reaching across with the magnetos, kind of to start the engine, but still it's so small. You can still legally fly from both seats. That led to my other restriction, which was left seat, right seat. They said you're restricted to the right seat, so they wanted to see me fly from both seats.
So when you did that solo with the FAA, did you do it, or that demonstration flight with the FAA before your first solo? Did you do it from the right seat?
I did, yes. So that's where the FAA, the FSDO, his name was Chris Morrison, great guy, but he said, well, I see you flying from the right seat. I can see how it's easier, but technically you need to be able to fly this from both seats. So I'd like to be able to see you fly from the left seat as well. He came up with that after the flight. So he did my private pilot check ride, which was after. So going back to that first medical flight test with the FAA, he was okay with me flying from the right seat, but he was the one who came up with the realization like, hey, you need to be able to fly from both seats. So that's why he said, I'd really like to see you do this again from the left seat, which we actually combined that particular flight with my private pilot check ride. So instead of using a DPE, a designated pilot examiner, I actually used the FSDO for my private pilot certificate. And the FSDO came out and sat with me, and he just observed my check ride from the right seat. So instead of having me do a separate flight from the left seat, I just did my private pilot check ride from the left seat. So now I've done both seats with him, and he saw me do both sides, and that covered that restriction. So left seat, right seat, pre-solo was both covered at that point.
What was the next biggest hurdle after that?
So that was the first two restrictions. The next one was electric flap, manual flap. So a Cessna has electric flaps
Mhm.
where you just push the lever down and they electrically go down. Whereas a Piper Cherokee, which OU had at the time, again, the FAA is thinking ahead because of where I'm going next.
Yeah, yeah.
He's he's realizing, hey, that Piper Cherokee has a flap lever on the floor, and they're manual flaps where you click them up,
Yep.
click them at 3 or 4 different detents, I forget,
Yep.
and then you push the button to release them to go down.
Yep.
So in his mind, he's thinking, if I'm in the left seat, how am I going to reach those on the floor with my right hand? So they put an electric flap restriction on me now. so now here I am. When I started at OU, which I mentioned right after, as soon as I could, I started. OU
Yeah.
had to make an exception in their syllabus for me. Well, not necessarily an exception, but they kind of worked it out to where I could fly their Cessna airplane that they had for aerobat training. Um, so I flew the Cessna for a few hours until I could get that flight test scheduled with the FAA. And the same guy from the FSDO came out and flew with me, and he observed me. We did it, we pushed it all the way to the edge of the flap limits because at that speed, it's harder to manipulate that flap control lever. And I was able to move them up and all the way down. Sometimes I'm kind of cross reaching with my left hand to get down on the floor because my right arm can't necessarily reach all the way to the floor sometimes
Yeah.
with my hand on the yoke. So I'd kind of put my arm on the yoke and reach my hand
Mhm.
down, but I was able to manipulate it just fine in a safe way. So he signed me off on that next restriction as well.
So you're doing a little cross controls here. You had your right arm up on the yoke and your left arm down. Okay.
Yep.
Cool. I mean, did that come fairly quickly? Did you figure that out in just a couple of flights? Did it take several hours, or like 10 minutes into a flight, you're like, hey, I can do this before you got to the ride?
It was pretty quick for me, thankfully.
Good.
Yeah. It was nerve wracking because at each point along with all these restrictions, I'm wondering if I don't pass this restriction, everything I've done up until this is, it's all for nothing. But
Yeah.
I was able to get in there pretty quickly. I sat in there, I'd stay late after class one day, or I'd get there early and I'd sit in the seat, reach down there, put in the extra time, and reach down there and manipulate those as much as I could. And my instructor, OU's, the University of Oklahoma, just great program. Very very good instructors, good staff there. They worked with me, and they were very supportive along the whole way as well.
So it sounds like so far between your Part 61 instructor, the guy at the FSDO, and your chief flight instructor there at OU, it sounds like you had nothing but support and encouragement. They understood the hurdles, but it doesn't sound like, at least you haven't, said it so far, none of them came up to you and said, yeah, you're not going to be able to do this. Or, yeah. So from that perspective, it sounds pretty encouraging.
Yes. No, and I had nothing but great support. I joked that the FAA tried their hardest to fail me, but because they kept trying to throw obstacle after obstacle at me. But, they're doing their job. They're making sure I'm a safe airman and, making sure that the end goal here is for me to be an airline transport pilot with passengers in the back. And am I going to be able to do that safely? And so I understood it every step of the way. And even flying with the FSDO on board, I never had a bad experience. Those guys came out. And at several points during my first getting my private pilot check ride done, flying with the FSDO, it's hard to schedule with them. It's very difficult. But I just stuck with it. And these guys were just nothing but supportive. Even the FAA themselves they were great to work with. They were super supportive of me.
Kind of kills the whole "we're from the FAA and we're here to help you" joke.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, it really does. Yeah. They're there's those guys out there for sure, but
yeah, right. Well, they weren't dealing with an enforcement problem with a non-rule follower. They were dealing with a young person that wanted to become an aviator, and part of their job is to make that happen or help that happen. So
and they got to get out of the office and go fly an airplane that day.
Yeah, right. Well, honestly, but look, in all truthfulness, for them, they were seeing something they probably hadn't really seen before. They probably knew the regs and knew what they had to do, but probably very few of them had actually worked with somebody like yourself that that had that kind of physical potential restraint that you guys were working through. So I think it was probably as good of an experience for them as it was for you.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
Probably like most of us hearing your story, they were probably in awe watching you get all this stuff done. So I think it was probably great on both parts. All right, so you get the private done. You're allowed to fly mechanical flaps. Allowed to use mechanical flaps. That's something you don't hear very often, right?
Right.
All right, so that was the third limitation removed. So what else? What happens next? So these limitations are kind of interesting because they're kind of, I think, explaining to all of us watching this, or what you had to go through. So what was the next step? You now have your private and 3 are limitations behind you.
Yeah. So the next 2 are mostly formalities. The SOTA that I received from the medical flight test. So the medical flight test was the actual process of flying with the FAA. I ultimately received a SOTA, statement of demonstrated ability, that showed that I passed the flight tests. Those were class specific, meaning they were only good for a certain class of medical. So at the time, I had a 3rd class medical. Well, if I want to continue on with my flight training, specifically become a commercial pilot and be a certified flight instructor, I needed to get a 2nd class medical. Looking back, I would have gone straight to 1st class, but I wasn't really thinking. So I went to 2nd class medical, and the FAA said, well, we need to do another medical flight test with you just to see if you were up to speed on all the commercial kind of, maneuvers, if you will. So the FAA came out. Now I'm flying with a different FSDO guy, still a very good experience, but he kind of came out to the flight school at OU. At this point, I've already gone through most of my CFI training even, and or at least my commercial training, I guess I should say. So I knew all these maneuvers. I knew what to expect. I could fly the Piper Cherokee, with my eyes closed. And he actually didn't even really know why he was there, because he thought we should just be able to change this to 2nd class medical, but technically we have to fly together. So he didn't even really have a script for the check ride. So we just kind of made it up as we went. I said, hey, why don't we go out to the practice area and we'll do all the commercial maneuvers, stalls. I'll show you the flaps because I don't want any questions with anything that we've done along the way. And we'll even land, and I'll switch seats, and I'll show you from both seats if you'd like. So I really got to name my own check ride there, which was kind of neat. And but the FAA examiner, he was, checking off all the boxes that he needed to. And when we landed, everything was good there. I got my 2nd class medical, which came with a 2nd class SOTA, statement of demonstrated ability. So that was the next one. And then again, I needed to do that for 1st class medicals. Like I said, I should have gone straight to 1st class, because then it would have been good for 1st class, which is what I have today, which is what you need as an airline transport pilot. So, but the FAA and their infinite wisdom here, they knew that OU had a King Air. So again, they're tailoring it specific to me, which is what they do for each individual, because we all have different physical limitations or restrictions that we've got to overcome. They wanted to see me fly the King Air at OU, and I had already done so through a turbine transition course. I flew 5 hours in the King Air. Not like I'm real proficient in it, because 5 hours of flying isn't much in the airplane. But
let me go back real quick though. Had you already gotten your multi-engine rating?
At this point, I had multi-engine, but I didn't have any restrictions as far as number of engines at this point. So
in the multi-engine training, was that any more difficult than the single engine stuff you had done, instrument stuff up until this point? Were there any challenges you remember getting your multi?
Yeah, it was just busier. I mean, flying from the left seat, you've got, you got 6 levers, or you got 4 levers to move rather over there in a piston. And in the King Air, there's 6, right, with the condition levers. But it was busier because my arm is having to push both, but they're, even like on a 737, they're close together. I can push them. I can manipulate them even a little bit if the engines are off, because a lot of time engines aren't necessarily synced up together where they stay together as they go forward and back. But so I could twist them and still be able to push and pull and get around the back of them. Nothing real crazy other than, just getting used to it. Because a lot of your multi-engine training is done single engine. It was kind of like, it was kind of like the same thing for me, but really, and then normal ops, I could push and pull I can push and pull both of the levers with my arm, no problem.
Your arm. Okay.
And the FAA didn't have any concerns there.
So the ATP and the King Air.
So then the ATP and the King Air, I strapped into the left seat, and our assistant chief flight instructor, Jignesh, he flew with me in the right seat. he was able to kind of give me power settings and tips on flying the airplane. Because again, I wasn't real proficient. The FAA wasn't checking my proficiency with the airplane. They were just wanting to see me manipulate the controls of a turbine-powered aircraft. And so we went out and we shot up. We did a single engine air work where we shut one down and flew around. And again, that was nothing. There's nothing to it. A little busier, like I said, because now there's 6 levers with a condition lever, prop lever, and the throttles. But so a little busier, but we shot approaches. And when we landed, the FAA was observing from the seat right behind where he could see everything. He said, you did everything to ATP standards, airline transport pilot standards. It looked great. You can handle that thing really well. So we're going to go ahead and give you your first class medical. And that was the kicker, because when I got my SOTA, this is SOTA number 5, it said limited to piston and turboprop land airplanes only, single engine and multi-engine. So now it specifically says on there piston and turboprop only. So that does not include turbojet, which is what my ultimate goal is, to get on with the airlines and fly CRJs and, eventually 737s. And so here I was with my next restriction that I was going to have to overcome.
Do you get your first job offer and demonstrate it there, or do you have to do it before you get a job offer? How did that play out?
So that was the big question. It was unknown. I asked the FAA, I said, hey, this restriction, is it something that can be done in a simulator? Does it need to be done in an airplane? I need to know, do I need to go take a loan out and go fly an airplane around, and but they said, no, it can be done in a simulator, which was a big relief. But at the same time, now I'm going to have to try and convince an airline to hire me with a medical certificate that shows I'm not, technically legal to fly their airplane. But one day when I was an instructor at OU, the president of Colgan Airlines came, and Colgan eventually they merged in with Mesaba and Pinnacle. So Pinnacle was who my first job was with. I went and talked with him. His name was Buddy Casey. And I introduced myself to him and said, hey, I'm an applicant. I have my name in there with you guys. Explained my whole situation, that I have a medical or a SOTA that limits me. But all I need to do is show that I can do it and have the FAA observe from the observation seat, and this restriction can be removed. Is that something that you guys would do for me? And he heard my whole story. I talked to him for a long time, and he goes, Airick, here's my information. You email me directly. I'm going to make sure you're in class with us one day. And I don't know how much he really, helped me out in the long run. I'm sure he did, but not long after that, I don't remember the exact timeline, but I got hired with Pinnacle Airlines. And I remember showing up at class one day with all my medical certificates and my SOTA, and I'm trying to explain to everybody, hey, don't kick me out of class. I promise I can do this. Just hang with me to the end. We'll remove this together. So. But they were super great. So
you go through NDOC, you get assigned an airplane, you start training. Do you get that observation ride with your final check ride, or part of your, the course? I mean, how did that work? Where did they stick the FAA in there to observe?
Yeah, I kind of thought it would come before the final check ride, but they just said, you know what, let's just combine it together. Your training's going well. You're flying this airplane real well. I got assigned the CRJ 200. And it's a twin jet. So I was doing just fine. And honestly, just what everyone says, turbojet is much easier than a turboprop, because now there's only 2 levers compared to 6.
Yep.
But they were great. The FAA came out, the FSDO who works with the airline, their FSDO rep came out from Memphis, and they sat in the observation seat with me, and just super relaxed check ride. I mean, they were super great, and they didn't ask me to do anything different than what I was already doing as part of my final check ride with the airline. They just said, just do it the way Pinnacle wants you to have this done. And that's what I did, and passed the check ride. And the FAA said, I'll get this typed up for you, and you got your new SOTA coming. And that's the soda that I have today that I carry with me on all my flights still today.
And what does it say?
So it still has a limitation on it technically, but it says limited to single engine and multi-engine, turboprop, turbojet, piston, land airplanes only. So pretty much everything.
How's that different from what I have?
So the only difference is it doesn't technically, if I were to ever go get like my helicopter rating, my rotor, license, the FAA would have to come out and observe. And I always joke because it says land on my soda. If I were to go get my seaplane rating, I think the FAA would have to come along, or at least I'd have to call the FAA before I did it because it says land on there. But yeah, for what I'm doing now, it's essentially restriction free. My medical says no restrictions.
If I go fly with you, I'm a 37 captain, you're a 37 FO. Unfortunately, we're in different domiciles, but maybe one day lightning will strike. But so what am I going to see differently, or how are you going to, the throttles, for you in the left seat or in the right seat. How does that work for you being in the right seat? Is it more difficult than you being in the left seat of an airplane? Because obviously your right arm, I guess, when you're flying with your left hand on the throttles, your right arm's manipulating the yoke. Is that more of a holding with your arm? I mean, how does that, and is it difficult? It's
challenging. It's not, I find that, I mean, now it's like riding a bike, right? I've been doing it long enough. It's fine. But I have to do things a little different. I use the trim wheel on the switch on the yoke to help me keep constant pressure on my arm. So on takeoff, the way the FO does it, I set the thrust, and then I put both hands on there. I put my left hand and my arm on there, and then once I'm airborne, I can actually put my arm on the yoke, and with a little bit of downward trim pressure, I can keep the yoke constantly pressured against my arm to where, there's little finger grooves in the back of the yoke, right?
Yeah.
So my arm really rests inside of one of those, and I can keep my hand on the thrust levers to keep the restrictions, met that we have in place, that I got to keep my hand on the thrust levers until a certain point, even though auto throttle is controlling it, right?
Yep.
And then, once we're airborne, it's kind of a lot of hands off and autopilot, that kind of thing. But once we're coming into land, that's the big point where it's autopilot off. As soon as I get the autopilot off, I roll the trim wheel forward 3 or 4 or 5 seconds, maybe a little longer, just to create a constant downward pressure to where if I were to let go, the yoke's going to push away from me. So I do that so that it's constantly resting into my right arm. So that if I need to climb the airplane, I pull harder. But if I need to lower the nose, instead of moving my arm to the other side and pushing, I just relax the pressure.
Yeah, sure.
So then it allows me to pull up and down with my arm. I actually have wrist movement in my arm. So my hand just never fully grew, but I do have wrist movement. I'm able to put my arm in there, and I'm able to pull up and push down. So in a crosswind, I'm able to manipulate the ailerons to account for either a left or right crosswind. To keep the wingtips in the right position.
Okay, that wrist movement, that's interesting. I didn't even think it didn't even come to the equation. It almost gives you a little bit of a grip, really, with that pressure all at the same time. Gives you a little leverage. Well, that's cool. Enough about flying. You're also an author. Tell us I told you before, I forgot, I'm in a different city right now. If you will, show us the book real quick, and let's talk a few minutes about what brought you to writing it.
Yeah. So my project during COVID, when I was home a bunch, was everyone's kind of pushed me to writing a book to kind of explain, kind of how I got here in my life. But I thought I'd start with a kid's book. I wrote this called Airick Flies High. And it's about a cartoon airplane. As you can see, and the cartoon airplane has one wing shorter than the other wing. The right wing on the airplane is like, me missing my right hand. So Airick's right wing shorter than his left wing, and he learns to fly like all the other airplanes. And like I said, I'd always been pushed to write a book. My wife my parents and everyone, my friends are like, hey, you should write a book explaining kind of how you got to where you are, your story. And I thought, and they said, well, it's COVID, you got a lot of time off, you might as well write it now. But I've got 2 little kids who run around at home, and so I don't have much time. But I said, hey, I could do a kid's book. That'd be a great place to start.
How old are your kids?
My son will be 3 this Saturday, and then my daughter is 5. She
Okay.
turned 5 in February.
Yeah. So, I mean, a great starting point for you to write this, because, you know, your kids, especially your 5-year-old, I'm sure, kind of understand your story a little bit, even probably your 3-year-old, maybe not. But yeah, so that sounds like it made a lot of sense. What was your daughter's reaction when she read it for the first time? I mean, was it much of a revelation to her when you guys were reading it? Maybe she was helping you write it. Kind of what was that process of writing it? And then I'd like to hear about it from your kids' point of view, because it is a kid's book.
Well, I'll start really by mentioning another book that kind of, helped me with the idea. There's another book, a guy named Ryan Hack. He wrote a kid's book. He's missing his left hand, and he wrote a book called Different is Awesome. It's a great book as well. I highly recommend. And, it's kind of highlighting how everyone is different somehow, one way or another. And I bought that book, and, we have it at our house on our shelf, and we'd read it at nighttime. And my daughter, and my son too, but not so much, right? But my daughter specifically will point to his hand in the book, because it's, he's as like a cartoon in the book, but you can see he's missing his hand. And she would say, hey daddy, he's got a hand just like, or an arm just like you, and he's missing a hand just like you, daddy. And she loves that. Every time we talk about that, she just kind of, it's real sweet and kind of mushy, but she says that stuff, and she kind of melts into me, like hugs on me, and is like, he's got an arm just like you, and that's so cool. And a long time ago, with what I kind of did with United with Haley Dawson, I flew the girl around who has the prosthetic, or the 3D printed hand rather. She had Poland syndrome, and we still keep in touch with her. And she's got a hand like me, is what my daughter says. And it's neat to see. And as far as from my book's perspective, it's really neat to see them read Austin, my son. He loves airplanes and points to the airplanes, and he always points to it as daddy's airplane. There's daddy's airplane. And my daughter, she points to him like, has the short wing like you do, daddy. And it's neat, because it's kind of the same reaction that I've gotten from kids all across the country right now. These kids who are missing hands or legs or whatever, and anything, and they get to connect with a character, kind of like in Finding Nemo. You got to connect with the fish who had the short fin, the lucky fin, in Finding Nemo. It's nice for most Barbie dolls, teddy bears, you name it, they all have 2 hands. Everything is made like that. Nowadays, things are different. There's Barbie dolls and wheelchairs, and, there's all sorts of different things, which we can go about all day. But it's nice for a kid who's missing a hand to look at this airplane and say, look, he's got a short wing, he's got a lucky fin, or he's got a limb difference like I do.
Was there any small network of other kids with limb differences when you were growing up that you knew, or had anybody written a book that you got to see anything like this when you were growing up, or not?
Not so much. There was a few people that my dad and my parents would always, if they found someone who was missing a limb, they did their best to connect us together, and I got to meet them. A lot of times it was an adult, because, that's who they're with all the time at work, or who they're running into and meeting with. It was before social media. We're growing up before the times of Facebook and all that. So there wasn't a whole lot of interaction with other kids. There wasn't a whole lot of social connections in regards to meeting kids, unfortunately. That's the big benefit today, is there are multiple hundreds of groups out there for limb different organizations. There's some really big ones and some really small ones. And that's kind of why I started my own Facebook page as well, not just to promote my book, but to kind of show, hey, if you've got a limb difference, you can do this. And I want to connect with you. In fact, I sent a message today to a kid a 19-year-old kid, I should say, 19-year-old.
Yeah.
He just lost. I think he owns a flight school or something. I don't know the whole story, but he's a pilot, he's a flight instructor, and he lost part of his hand. And that's what this whole thing's about, is connecting with people and being able to reach out and mentor. And I've had the pleasure of doing that with several people along the way.
Hey, look, I got a 11-year-old and a 16-year-old, both with 4 complete limbs, and they both, even though they're 11 and 16, they read it and thought it was really cool. Like, both of them. So I think this may end up connecting with not just kids with limb differences, but other kids to help accept other kids that may be different in one way or the other.
Right. That's the whole point. Yeah, we're all different somehow,
Hey, go back to the flight you did with the girl with the 3D printed.
Yeah.
What? Yeah, I don't know anything about that. Sorry.
So that's kind of a really great story. United Airlines, they hit it out of the park with this one, pun intended, because it was baseball related.
Okay.
This little girl, I was on a layover one time, and I got a reassignment into a day off. I had to fly double red eyes. I was real angry about it, upset. And about 2 hours later, I get a call from a Chicago number. So I answer it, and they say, "Hey, Airick, have you heard this story about about Haley Dawson? Her name's Haley. She lives out in Las Vegas, and she's got Poland syndrome, missing part of her hand, and she has a 3D printed hand, and she uses her 3D printed hand to throw a baseball, and she's throwing the first pitch at all 30 Major League Baseball parks. That's her goal. It's called the Journey to 30. Well, her I believe it was pitch number 4 was going to be the following day at the World Series in Houston at the Astros game. So I'm thinking, oh, cool, I get to go to the World Series and see this pitch.
Yeah, right.
But no, what they wanted me to do was, when I got to Newark that next day, I was going to deadhead to Houston, spend the night, and then the following day after the game, Haley and her family were coming up to the airport, and I got to surprise Haley at the gate, and they reassigned me to operate Houston to Las Vegas. So I actually got to fly the family home, and it's a really great story. There's maybe we can post a link to it if you'd like. I'll send it to you. United really did a great job. They filmed us meeting and interacting together, and we got to talk, and she got to come sit in the flight deck of the 737 with me, put the hat on her. She got to talk on the PA, and anyhow, she boarded the airplane early. It was great, and I flew her home to Las Vegas that day.
I've got goosebumps right now. I'm not going to lie to you.
Yeah, it was a great story.
Almost a 50-year-old guy here. I got goosebumps. Yeah, that's outstanding. United doesn't always do the right thing, but every now and then they really come through and shine. And I think it's amazing that somebody in the company had the thought of saying, hey, do we have any pilots? Or I guess they probably looked for pilots or flight attendants or anybody with limb differences, and said, hey, and gosh, to find a pilot, that was awesome. So.
Yeah, it was great. How they connected it all together. I was glad to be a part of it. And I actually got to be there for the end of it as well. I think, like I said, that was pitch number 4. Well, the 30th pitch, on the final pitch, it was in Los Angeles at the Angels game, and they asked me to be there for that one as well. And Jim Abbott, one-handed major league pitcher, was there, and they said, oh, by the way, you're not just going to be there on the field supporting Haley. You're going to get to throw out a first pitch as well.
Did you really?
So I wore my uniform out to Los Angeles, and I actually got a picture hanging up on my wall over here of me and Jim Abbott and Mike Trout and Haley and her brother. And I got to throw a first pitch to Mike Trout with my uniform on. And talk about nerve-wracking. It was fun, though.
I hope you warmed up a little bit at home before you went out there and threw that one. We know you got the ability.
I did. I threw it, pretty well, but it wasn't the best pitch. I was in my dress shoes up on this loose dirt mound. I can make excuses all day, but nerves are running through me for sure.
And look, if it was as long as it was better than Anthony Fauci's first pitch, and that was pretty bad. But I think the best celebrity first pitch on it, whether you loved him or hated him, but George W. Bush threw an awesome strike in the game after 9/11.
Yeah, after 9/11. Yeah, it was awesome. Yeah.
Anyway, cool. Well, man, thanks for spending time with me. I think that's a good high note to end on today. Airick Flies High is the book. Airick Gaffney is the author. Houston-based 737 first officer. It was great to meet you, Airick, and I really appreciate you spending time with me today.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
All right, take care.
All right, you too.